It was a cold night, and the sky was full of stars. The wind was quiet, and the town was sleeping. He was walking near the forest with his dog Max. The trees were tall and dark, but he liked walking there. It helped him clear his mind and forget the stress of his job. Max was sniffing the ground and running around with joy. Then suddenly a bright light flashed in the sky. It was fast like lightning, but it did not disappear. Instead, it grew bigger and brighter and hotter. He looked up and saw it falling from the sky. It was not a shooting star because it was making noise, a loud humming sound that shook the air. Then it crashed deep into the forest with a boom. The ground shook, and the birds flew out in fear. Max barked loudly and ran toward the light. He followed him without thinking. His heart was beating fast, and his hands were shaking. He ran through the trees and jumped over rock. Smoke was rising in the air, and the smell was strange. It smelled like burned metal and wet soil. He reached the crash site and stopped. There was a large hole in the ground, and it was glowing. The dirt was black, and the leaves were burning. In the middle of the crater was a small silver pod. It looked like something from a science fiction movie. Its surface was cracked, and there were sparks flying from it. He walked closer and saw something moving inside. The pod opened slowly and made a soft hiss. Then he heard a sound that made his heart stop. It was the sound of a child crying, not a loud cry, but a soft, weak sound like someone was lost and scared. He stepped forward and looked inside. There she was, a small girl with silver blue skin and glowing eyes. Her hair was white like snow and floating around her head. She looked about 6 or 7 years old. She was wrapped in a thin blanket that was torn and dirty. She looked at him with wide eyes full of fear. He did not know what to say. She was not human, but she was not dangerous. She looked like she needed help. He slowly reached out his hand. She flinched but did not move away. He smiled and spoke gently. "You are safe now," he said. Max walked closer and sat beside the pod. The girl looked at the dog and her eyes softened. She reached out and touched Max's head. Max wagged his tail and licked her hand. The girl smiled. For the first time he picked her up carefully. She was very light, like she had no weight at all. She held on to him and buried her face in his shoulder. He walked back through the forest with her in his arms. Max walked ahead and led the way. When they reached his house, he made her a bed on the couch. He gave her a glass of warm milk and wrapped her in a blanket. She looked around the room like she had never seen anything like it. The lights, the pictures, the TV, the books, everything was new to her. She did not speak, but her eyes said many things. He tried to ask her questions, but she just looked at him. Then she pointed at the stars through the window and she said one word, "Lyra." He did not know if that was her name or something else, but he started calling her Lyra. From that night, she did not protest. She seemed to like the name. She slept quietly on the couch while Max stayed beside her. He sat on the chair and watched her sleep. His mind was full of questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she alone? And most of all, why did he feel like she was meant to find him? That night changed everything in his life. He had found something that should not exist, but she was there, real and breathing and scared. And somehow he knew deep inside that his life would never be the same again, because he had not just found a lost child, he had found something much bigger, and the universe might not be ready for it. The morning sun was soft and golden. As it touched the windows of the quiet house, he was already awake, sitting at the table with a cup of tea in his hands, watching the little girl on the couch. She was still sleeping with Max curled up beside her like a guard. The blanket was almost slipping off her shoulders, but she did not move. He still remembered the night before, every second of it playing again in his mind. The crash, the light, the strange pod, and then her face looking up at him full of fear and wonder. He had many questions, but none of them had answers. For now, he only knew one thing: she was here, and she was real. As the clock ticked slowly, she opened her eyes. Her glowing eyes scanned the room carefully, as if trying to understand everything around her. She looked at the books on the shelves, the pictures on the wall, and the ceiling fan spinning above her. Then she looked at him and he smiled with a gentle nod. "Good morning, Lyra," he said in a calm voice. She blinked once and then slowly sat up. Max jumped off the couch and wagged his tail, running around the room like he was announcing a celebration. He brought her a small toy ball in his mouth and dropped it near her feet. She looked at the ball, picked it up slowly, and rolled it back to Max. He barked with joy and they started playing like old friends. He watched this with surprise and curiosity. Lyra was not afraid anymore. She was acting like a child, even though everything was still new to her. He made her some breakfast, toast and scrambled eggs. She did not eat at first but watched him take a bite and then copied his actions carefully. She chewed slowly and made a face like she was tasting something strange, yet interesting. He laughed without sound and nodded at her. The day went by in a strange, calm way. He showed her things around the house. The fridge, the mirror, the TV, the lights, each thing made her eyes widen with curiosity. She touched everything gently like it might disappear if she blinked. When he turned on the TV, she jumped back in surprise, but then walked closer and stared at the moving images with wonder. Cartoons came on the screen and she tilted her head like she was trying to decode some ancient message. She pointed at the characters and repeated some of the words slowly. He realized then that she was learning, not just watching, but truly learning. Every word, every image, every sound. Her mind was quick like a spark catching dry leaves. In the evening he gave her paper and color pencils. She held them strangely at first, then figured them out. By watching him, she started to draw strange shapes with curves and lines like symbols from another world. He watched her hand move fast as if she remembered every detail from somewhere deep in her memory. Then she drew something else, a star map. He recognized the shapes of some stars. She pointed to one cluster of stars and said the word again, Sorrentha. He did not know what it meant, but she said it with such deep feeling that he knew it was important. He wrote it down, hoping to understand it later at night. He made a small bed in the guest room for her, but she followed him quietly and stood by the door of his room holding Max's toy ball in her hand. He understood without words and made a space for her near the bed. She lay down with Max next to her and closed her eyes. He looked at her and felt something he could not explain. She was not from this world yet. She was now part of his small world. The next few days became a rhythm. He taught her simple words like cup and chair and dog and sky. She repeated them and added new words without help. She was talking in short sentences. By the third day he was amazed and confused. No child could learn this fast, not even the smartest ones. She also began to show strange signs. One morning he found her outside touching a dead flower in the garden. She placed her hand on it and closed her eyes. The flower stood up slowly and turned green again. He did not believe his eyes. He called her name and she looked at him with no fear. He asked how she did that, but she only said, "I remember." Later she moved a small toy across the table without touching it. He watched in silence, not knowing what to say. Lyra just smiled and said, "Magic?" But he knew it was something else, not magic, but something far beyond his understanding, something from where she came from. That night while she slept, he sat by the window looking at the stars. He wondered who she really was. He wondered if someone was coming for her. He wondered what Sorrentha really meant. His world had changed forever, and he knew the quiet days were ending soon. The wind was strong that night, and the sky looked deeper than ever. He stood outside on the porch watching the stars flicker like whispers in the dark. Max sat beside him, tail still, ears alert, as if he could feel something coming. Inside the house, Lyra was sitting on the floor, surrounded by colored pencils and torn paper. Her hands moved fast, drawing new symbols and strange maps he had never seen before. She had been quiet all day, saying little, smiling less. Her eyes stayed on the sky. Even when she was inside, she would stop talking, suddenly turn toward the window and just stare. He noticed she was doing that more and more each night, like she was waiting for something or someone to appear in the dark above. He walked inside and asked if she wanted dinner. She shook her head gently, then pointed at a drawing she had just finished. It was a large circle with smaller circles spinning around it and arrows pointing outward. He asked her what it meant, and she said one word, coming. He felt a cold wave pass through his chest, like winter air had filled the room. He kneeled beside her and asked again, "Who is coming, Lyra?" She pointed up at the ceiling, then at her own chest, and then tapped her drawing again. He could not understand her full meaning, but he felt the weight of it like a message he was not ready to hear that night. Lyra refused to sleep in her room. She curled up on the couch with Max and kept her eyes on the front door like she was guarding something. He stayed awake longer than usual, listening to the hum of the night and the silence between the stars. He did not know what he was expecting, but something in his bones told him to be ready. In the middle of the night, a soft noise woke him. It was not loud, but sharp, like a chime or a bell from far away. He rushed to the living room and found Lyra standing by the window with her hand on the glass. Her eyes were wide and glowing, brighter than he had ever seen before. She whispered words in her strange language, and then said again, "They are coming." He looked outside but saw nothing but shadows and trees. Still, something in her voice made him believe her without question. The next day was cloudy and the wind never stopped blowing. Birds were not singing and even the neighbors' dogs were quiet. The world felt like it was holding its breath. He took Lyra for a walk, hoping fresh air would clear both their minds. They walked past trees and fields and small rivers. Lyra walked slowly, touching the leaves and the grass like she was saying goodbye. He asked her what she felt, and she looked up at him and said, "The sky is speaking." He did not know what to say back, so he just held her hand tighter. That evening, while she was drawing again, he called a friend who worked at the local observatory. He asked if anything strange had been seen in the sky lately. The friend paused and said there was a spike in unknown signals near Earth's orbit. He said they were not satellites or normal space traffic. Something was out there and it was getting closer. He thanked him and sat down slowly. Trying to keep calm, he looked at Lyra, who was now drawing the same star pattern over and over again. It was the same map she had drawn days ago, but now with one extra detail, a small red mark near one star. He asked her what that was, and she touched it with her finger and said, "Here." Then she pointed at herself, then she pointed at the house. He felt the floor shift beneath him. Though nothing had moved, he realized she was showing where she came from and where they were now, and that the red mark was moving each night after that. The wind got louder, and the stars seemed to burn brighter. Animals acted strange, and lights in the house flickered sometimes without reason. Lyra spoke less, but looked older somehow, like her eyes were seeing too much. He began to write down everything she said, every word, every symbol. He filled pages with her drawings and kept them in a box under his bed. One night she came to him with a small piece of metal he had never seen before. She said she found it under the couch, and it was from her ship. The metal was warm in his hand and humming softly like a heartbeat. When he touched it, he saw flashes in his mind, a giant city of light floating in the stars. A tower made of crystal, a woman with silver eyes calling out in pain. He dropped the metal and gasped for air. Lyra picked it up gently and held it close to her chest. Then she said softly, "My mother." He looked at her in silence and felt a deep ache in his heart. He knew then the signals from space were not random. Someone had found her trail, and they were coming to take her back. The sky opened like a wound in the middle of the night, glowing red and gold as if the stars were on fire. He stood outside the house with Max barking wildly beside him, while Lyra stood still in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the light. The air buzzed with strange sounds that seemed to echo inside his bones like whispers in a deep cave. A shape came down from the clouds, smooth and silent and shining like polished stone. It floated above the trees like it was breathing, like it was alive. The shape was not a ship with wings or rockets, but something more graceful, something more ancient. It moved like it belonged to the sky. He took a step forward, but his legs felt heavy, like the ground was holding him in place. Lyra walked past him barefoot and calm, her silver hair glowing in the strange light. She raised her hand slowly, and the ship responded by lowering closer to the earth. Then it stopped just above the grass, and a soft beam of light touched the ground like a stair made of gold. A tall figure stepped into the beam, and the light followed her like a robe made of stars. She had the same glowing eyes as Lyra, the same hair, the same shape of face, but her presence was larger than life, like a queen from a forgotten world. Lyra took a step toward her and whispered one word, "Mother." He felt his heart twist as the woman looked at Lyra with eyes full of something deep and powerful, not just love, but also pain and loss and a sadness that reached across galaxies. The woman knelt down and opened her arms, but Lyra did not move. Instead, she looked back at him as if asking for permission. He nodded slowly, though his chest felt like it was breaking. Lyra ran into her mother's arms, and for a moment the whole world seemed to pause. Max stopped barking, and the wind stopped blowing, and even the stars seemed to wait. The woman held Lyra close and whispered in her ear words he could not understand. Then she stood and looked at him with eyes that seemed to see everything. She walked toward him slowly, her feet not touching the ground, her voice soft but strong. "Thank you," she said, for keeping her safe. He wanted to speak, but could not find any words that would fit inside this moment. The woman looked around at the house, the trees, the sky, and then back at him. She said this world is quiet and full of life, and that her people had searched many years for the signal from Lyra's pod. She said they had feared the worst. She said she had lost everything to find her daughter. He asked her if she would take Lyra away and never return. The woman looked at Lyra, then at him, then at the stars. She said Lyra had changed and that Earth had touched her spirit. She said Lyra's heart was no longer only of the stars. She said she did not come to take her, but to understand her choice. Lyra walked between them and held both their hands like a bridge made of trust. She looked up at her mother, then at him, and said she wanted both. She wanted to stay here, but not without her mother. She wanted to learn more of Earth and more of herself. She said her place was with those who loved her. The woman said she could stay for a short time to understand this new life. She said she would not take Lyra away by force. She said love must choose its own path. For the next few days, the woman stayed in the house, moving like a shadow of light. She did not eat or sleep or speak much, but watched everything. She touched the walls and the books and the trees and seemed to listen to the wind. She spoke to Max in a silent way, and he followed her like a loyal friend. She showed Lyra how to shape light into music and how to listen to the voices in stones. He watched them and felt like he was living in a dream made of wonder and sorrow. Then one evening she stood on the hill behind the house and looked at the stars with a heavy gaze. She said she had to return soon, but she would leave a part of herself behind. She said Lyra would always have a way to speak to her. She gave Lyra a crystal that sang when held close to the heart. She touched his shoulder and said the bond between them was rare and strong. She said he had given her daughter something no world could offer. She said Earth was now part of their story. As the ship rose again into the sky, Lyra did not cry. She stood beside him, holding the crystal with one hand and his hand with the other. The stars blinked softly above, as if saying goodbye and welcome all at once. And the night returned to silence, but it would never be the same again. Morning after the ship disappeared, the sky was calm and the house was quiet, but something had changed in the air. He made breakfast in the kitchen with Max sitting patiently near his feet and Lyra drawing pictures at the table with her glowing crystal beside her. The birds were singing and the world seemed peaceful, but he could feel the weight of something new pressing against the walls. She was still here. Lyra's mother had not left. She had only moved her ship higher into the clouds where no one could see it, but she had not gone far. She was watching. Sometimes in the evening the sky shimmered softly and Lyra would smile as if hearing a voice only she could understand. One night, as the stars began to show, she walked out into the garden and stood. And there quietly a soft light fell on the grass, and the tall glowing woman appeared again, not with fire or noise, but with silence, like moonlight slipping into a dream. She looked different this time, not like a visitor or a queen, but like someone who had made a choice. She came to him and said, she had been watching the earth more closely. She said she felt things here that she had not felt for a long time. She said time moved slower here, and yet everything felt full. She said she wanted to understand why her daughter felt safe and happy in this small, simple world. He listened without speaking and only nodded. She walked through the house and touched the books and the chairs and the old wooden stairs. She watched Lyra laugh as Max chased butterflies in the backyard, and she sat with them under the trees. That night she did not return to the ship. She stayed in the guest room, and the walls seemed to glow faintly where she passed. He did not ask questions because the answers were already there in her eyes. She wanted to stay, not just to visit, but to live, to share this quiet world and be near her daughter, and maybe find something she had lost a long time ago. The days turned slow and warm. She helped Lyra learn to control her growing powers with calm hands and soft words. She taught her how to feel the energy of trees and how to listen to the rhythm of rain. He watched them from the window with Max resting at his feet and a cup of tea cooling in his hands. Sometimes they all sat around the fire and told stories. Lyra would speak of stars and dreams, and he would speak of rivers and forests and the first time he rode a bicycle. The woman listened closely and sometimes asked small questions like, what is a firefly, or why do leaves fall in the autumn? She was learning like a child with the mind of an ancient soul. One evening, she asked if she could help fix the old broken radio in the garage. He laughed but agreed and watched as she gently ran her fingers across the metal. The radio hummed and sparked, then played a soft tune from a station no longer on air. He looked at her and she smiled for the first time, not like an alien queen, but like someone who had finally exhaled after 1,000 years of holding breath. At night, she walked through the garden barefoot and sang songs that made the stars feel closer. She spoke to the wind and it listened. He could feel the shift in everything. Lyra was happier, brighter, stronger. The house felt alive, like it had grown roots deeper into the earth, but he also knew the world outside was still turning. People would ask questions, satellites would see things. He asked her what would happen if someone found out. She said they would be ready. She said fear grows in darkness, but fades in truth. She said they would show the world not with power, but with kindness. He believed her because her voice carried more truth than any law or machine. The neighbors noticed changes but said nothing. The garden grew faster and the nights were calmer, and Max barked less at shadows. Everything felt right and yet unreal. Then one morning, Lyra stood by the window and said something he had never heard before. She said, "This is my home." He turned and saw her mother behind her with the same quiet look. They were not leaving. They had chosen this place, this house, this quiet corner of the universe. He felt a strange mix of joy and fear. He was no longer just a man with a quiet life. He was now part of something bigger, a new kind of family, a new kind of story, and the stars above seemed to lean closer as if they too wanted to stay a little longer and see what would happen next. The night was colder than usual, and the wind carried a strange scent like metal and fire and memory, all tangled into one breath. He sat near the fireplace with Lyra sleeping on the couch, wrapped in her soft blue blanket, and Max curled beside her like a warm, silent guard. Her mother stood near the window, looking out into the darkness where the stars were hiding behind clouds that refused to move. She had not spoken much for days, and her eyes carried a weight that grew heavier with each sunset. He had seen it before in soldiers and in old photographs of people who had seen too much and lost even more. Tonight, something felt different. The house was still, but the air was full. She turned toward him slowly and walked across the room without a sound. She sat across from him and placed a small, glowing stone on the table between them. It pulsed gently like a slow heartbeat and made the shadows move like they were alive. She said the time had come to share the truth. He nodded and listened without speaking. She said Lyra was born not on a planet like Earth, but inside a moving city built among the stars, a place made of light and crystal and songs that only the heart could hear. She said their kind lived without war, without hunger, without lies, for thousands of years, floating across galaxies, collecting stories and helping new worlds grow. She said Lyra was not an ordinary child, but a chosen one, born during a rare event when 3 stars aligned and poured their energy into the heart of the city. From the moment she opened her eyes, she began to glow with a light older than time. They called her the Starborn, a gift and a mystery. Some believed she would lead them to a new future, others feared what her power might unlock. She said Lyra began to show strange abilities, even as a baby, bending light with laughter and making flowers bloom without touch. The elders watched her with awe and caution. She said not all hearts are pure, even in worlds of peace. A secret group grew afraid of what Lyra might become, and they made plans to control her future. Her mother discovered the truth too late. They tried to take Lyra during a journey between stars, but the plan failed and the ship was damaged, and Lyra's pod was sent away for safety. The coordinates were scrambled and no one knew where she landed. Her mother searched every signal, every echo, every whisper across the galaxy for years, while her city crumbled from within. The truth split their people. Some left in sorrow, some stayed in silence, and some disappeared into shadows. She said the moment she found Lyra's signal again was the first time she felt alive after 1,000 years of grief. She said Earth was not random. Lyra's pod had followed something, a feeling maybe, a call from a soul who would keep her safe. She looked at him and said, "You were not chosen by accident." He felt his throat tighten, and memories of that first night came rushing back, the light, the fear, the wonder. He asked if Lyra knew any of this. She said not yet. She said the memories were locked deep inside her to protect her until she was ready. She said now she is ready. Lyra stirred in her sleep and murmured something in a language he could not understand. The crystal on the table pulsed brighter for a moment, then dimmed again. Her mother reached out and held the crystal and whispered soft words that made the flames in the fireplace dance in rhythm. She said Lyra's powers would grow now that she was surrounded by love and safety. She said Earth would soon feel those powers even if it did not understand them. He asked what would happen if others came again, not with love but with fear. She said fear will come, but so will courage. She said Lyra is not a weapon but a light. She said the real danger is not her power but what others might try to do with And she stood and walked back to the window, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. She said something is coming, something old, something forgotten. She said the stars are not quiet tonight. He felt the air shift and the walls hum like the house itself was waking up. He looked at Lyra and felt a new kind of protectiveness rise inside him. Not just for her safety, but for her truth. She was not just a child from another world. She was a key to something greater, and whatever was coming would want that key, but she was not alone, not anymore. He stood and walked to the window and stood beside her, and together they looked out into the dark, waiting for the stars to speak again. The morning came slowly, as if the sun was unsure whether it should rise or hide behind the clouds forever. The sky was pale gold, and the trees stood still, as if listening to something only they could hear inside the house. Everything was quiet, except for the soft sound of breathing and the faint hum of the crystal on the table. Lyra stood in the center of the living room with her eyes closed and her hands gently raised as if holding the wind itself. Her mother watched from the doorway, while Max sat at her feet, calm and silent and aware. He stood near the window with his heart full of questions and his mind trying to catch up with what he now understood. Lyra was changing. She no longer moved like a child lost in a new world. She moved like someone who belonged to both sky and soil, someone who carried stars in her blood and roots in her voice. He stepped forward and asked her softly if she was ready. She opened her eyes and nodded, not like a child being brave, but like a leader accepting a path. Her mother walked to her side and placed a hand on her shoulder, then looked at him with a deep stillness in her gaze. Today was the day Lyra would choose, not because someone forced her, but because choice is what made her human and something more. They stepped outside together, and the sky seemed to open wider, as if giving them room. The hill behind the house was now marked with soft glowing patterns that Lyra had drawn in the grass, using light from the crystal. Each line pulsed gently like breath, and each curve whispered a story from a world far away. She stood in the center of those markings and raised the crystal high into the air. A soft sound rang out, not loud but deep, like the beginning of a song written in the language of planets. The wind picked up, and the sky shimmered, and then above them appeared the ship. It was not the same as before. It was smaller, now shaped differently, more like a part of the earth than a visitor from beyond. It hovered with care and grace, not with power. The door opened, and inside stood a figure, not her mother, but another, a messenger, perhaps a guide, or maybe someone sent to remind them that Lyra's choice was not just hers, but a signal to others. The figure said nothing. It waited. Lyra looked at him, then at her mother, and then at the house and the trees and the flowers that had bloomed early around the porch. She took a step forward toward the ship, then she stopped. She turned and walked back to him and held his hand. She looked up at the messenger and said, "This is my home now, not just because I love them, but because they loved me first." The figure stepped back, and the ship slowly began to rise, as if understanding her answer. No anger, no warning, no regret, only silence and light. The ship vanished like a sigh, and the sky cleared. Birds began to sing again, and the trees moved gently in the wind. Her mother smiled and touched her face, then turned to him and said, "The bond has been sealed." Lyra's choice had created something stronger than distance or time. She was no longer just a visitor or a lost child. She was a daughter of two worlds, and both had accepted it. They walked back to the house together as one. In the days that followed, things felt both the same and different. The house was still small and the town still quiet, but people noticed the way the garden never stopped growing. They noticed how Lyra seemed to heal wounded animals with a single touch. They noticed how the sky above their hill was always a little brighter at night. No one asked questions, but they knew something special had taken root in that home. Lyra spent her mornings reading books and her afternoons helping her mother plant strange glowing seeds in the forest nearby. At night, they would all sit by the fire and tell stories, not just of Earth, but of other stars, other songs, and other lives. Max listened with his head on Lyra's lap, and sometimes barked at shadows that were not really shadows. He watched all of this with quiet joy and wonder. He no longer feared the unknown because it had become part of his everyday life. He no longer asked, "Why me?" because the answer was simple. Love chooses without reason. Now they were a family, not because they looked alike or came from the same world, but because they chose each other again and again, and somewhere Above them, among the stars, others were watching not with anger or envy, but with hope that maybe one small act of kindness could change the path of an entire galaxy, and deep in the forest behind their home a new flower bloomed that had never bloomed on Earth before, a flower that whispered her name whenever the wind passed through its petals and carried her story into the future.